viewer, welcome to this program. It's the Bible Journey. Thank you very much for joining us this day as we start our analysis of the book of Exodus, chapter 35. With me on set are our dear three pastors. First of all is Pastor Peter Nyagah. Welcome, Pastor.
Thank you so much.
And we also have Pastor Dan Abuya.
Pleasure being here, thank you.
And on my right-hand side is Pastor Kabira wa Kabira. Welcome, Pastor.
Thank you, appreciate as always.
And as we start, let's have a word of prayer from Pastor Nyagah.
Our gracious Father in heaven, we thank you so much once again for giving us a privilege to be before you. And as you open the scriptures, we ask of your guidance through the power of the Holy Spirit. Be with our viewers too as we go through this show. We pray in Jesus' name.
Amen. Now join us for our study today. In the book of Exodus chapter 35, my dear pastors, we start with the Sabbath regulations. And of course, now Moses is from the mountain. Of course, we have gone through that experience, and between him, the children of Israel, and the presence of the Lord. Now, there is an emphasis made on the Sabbath. And this is what now we have, especially from verse 1 to verse 3. Now, the verses say, "And Moses gathered all the congregation of the children of Israel together and said to them, These are the words which the Lord has commanded you to do. Work shall be done for 6 days, but the seventh day shall be a holy day for you, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. You shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings on the Sabbath day." Now, I'll just want to get your first introductory statements before we get to sink into these particular Sabbath regulations of verse 1 to 3. Pastor Dan.
This is an interesting episode, and indeed the next 3, 4, 5 episodes, because the viewer might notice that we're going to have a lot of similar mentionings, like what we've had before.
What previously.
Yeah, that is right here. Because chapters 21 to 25, they mirror this, rather 25 to 31, they mirror chapters 35 to 40 of Exodus. And so what is being mentioned now, what God is mentioning to Moses up in the mountain, what Moses is recording, now Moses has come down. We are going to see him now presenting it to the people and actualizing it now in action. So because of that, you may hear like a lot of repetition, but there is a good reason for it.
Okay, so what we already went through was God speaking to Moses. Now it's Moses and the people. He is repeating what the Lord has already said on the mountain. So to us, it seems like a repetition because we have what was recorded on the mount. But to the people is like the first time because they are hearing it from Moses' mouth.
That is right, and also
the things being actualized.
Doing it now.
Yeah, okay. Pastor Nyagah.
I think Pastor just mentioned it. We are now preparing the next few chapters to the end of this book of Exodus. We'll be dealing with actualizing the plan which Moses was given on the Mount of Sinai. We spent quite some good time on the mountain, about 80 days. Because Moses was up the mountain 40 days, he came down, we met the rebellion at the foot of the mountain, he went back again. And in chapter 34 gives us another 40 days again of Moses up the mountain. But now he has come down. And we ended the last discussion where when he was coming down, his face was shining, indicating now things are new. And so from chapter 35, we are going to deal with a lot of actual activities of what has been put down through writing by Moses. One, building the sanctuary. We will be repeating the issues of the artisans, the experts, the materials being brought to the children of Israel. Those are the things we are preparing to to see. And if it's about now worshiping, but like you're talking about Sabbath worship, they were instructed. Now they are going to actually do it. So I think those are the things now viewers expect now going forward.
And Pastor Kabira.
Well, it's more or less the same vein, but I even actually don't want to say it's repetition. It may appear as repetition, but one is a spoken instruction, the other is an actual that denotes how faithful the children of Israel and Moses obeyed the commands. The reason as to why it's being written down is to show how they were so obedient to the letter. That is what people say, to the letter. There was nothing like editing in due because of the circumstances that have come. People just messed up about the gold calf. But we will see them enthusiastically acting out what the Lord had required, as if they were not the same people who had worshipped the golden calf. So for me, these chapters are about respect and obedience to God, to the letter, no matter the changing times or circumstances or whatever has happened. So I think Moses' recording, remember it's still Moses who wrote. So for him to redo the same thing, I believe he wanted to emphasize the importance of obedience to God and doing according to God's wishes without putting anything in context of, maybe environmental or, cultural, or about when God has said, he's already included that kind. So the whole idea, I think, of chapter 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40 is about reliving the experience as God has required of it.
Wow.
And just allow me also to add further in this preliminary stage that on top of the obedience of Israelites now being manifested, maybe out of fear, or they're scared, they don't want to repeat the mistake again. I think it also brings out the faithfulness of God.
Yes.
Because imagine that this God who has been he has been angered, honestly, he has been annoyed, and these guys have breached the contract that they had with him, but we find him sticking
to the same thing that
with them, and he remains faithful to the covenant. And I think also this is where Pastor, my fellow pastors, if I'm right, sometimes we hear of the Mosaic covenant, or the Mosaic, we are talking of the original covenant, the Abrahamic covenant, but remember that it's almost like God almost nullified it. He didn't, but he told Moses that, I want to do away with these guys and start something afresh with you. So sometimes when you hear the Mosaic covenant, you trace it here because it's because of Moses that God is sticking through with his covenant. Because of his pleading with him, remember what Moses told God, that, okay, you know what, better than you plot me out. So really, it is on the strength of Moses' mercy, Moses' pleading, that we see still God sticking through this. So sometimes we do refer to the Mosaic covenant. It is really the Abrahamic covenant, but because of Moses and his love for his people.
Of course, we saw Moses pleading with God and saying, no, you can't do anything like that. Right. You have to maintain your covenant.
That's right.
Pastor Nyagah, you are looking at... And,
I'm trying to digest. You see, the Mosaic covenant would be better understood as Mosaic law,
right,
rather than covenant. So that we have one covenant. God has always had one covenant. But you see, in the scholarly world, when that is what Pastor Dan was trying to bring out, there are those who feel that there's Mosaic covenant based on the faithfulness and commitment of Moses. Because actually, we owe a lot of Moses because he pleaded with the Lord. God and say no. To the extent of this Moses, we saw that previously, Moses reminding God, you forgot that you promised Abraham, you forgot to promise Isaac, you forgot to promise Jacob. So we see God moving forward with his plan because of Moses. And so really Moses is very, very key.
So his part is that he really had to remind God and insist you have to stick to that. In as much as God wouldn't have, left that, but he's telling him you remember that covenant with Abraham.
So we appreciate when God said, I will make you a great nation. Meaning, God was moving away from the Abrahamic covenant into
Mosaic
covenant. But Moses said no.
Let's stick with the
Let's
original.
stick with the original.
Abrahamic.
I'm going to support the original plan.
Wow,
And then,
wow.
yeah.
Because I'm a grandson
Yeah,
of the
yes,
same.
yes.
And of course now, dear viewer, you will now notice that in this episode and the next, we are just preparing now to actualize. So here we are just in the element of preparation for what we are supposed to do. So from the next, after of course the third episode from now, we'll now be actualizing what we saw on the mount. So bear with that, with us. If you may see, it's kind of repetition, but it's not. We are now actualizing the whole thing. And as Pastor Kabira said, now it's just to show us that they stuck to the letter and didn't do anything of their own. They stuck to what the Lord had instructed them. Now, we've read about the Sabbath, and of course, now the Lord really emphasizing on the Sabbath issue. And when you look at the first verse, not the first, the second, he says, work shall be done for 6 days, but the seventh day shall be a holy day to you, a Sabbath of rest to the Lord. Whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. Let's first of all just remind ourselves about the Sabbath and how serious it was that God has been speaking about it on various occasions. Since we saw this, the Sabbath, he has kept on repeating. And of course, we've said this, that is for emphasis and the seriousness, showing the seriousness that it deserves. But somebody may be viewing the program for the first time, Pastor Dan, and wondering, this Sabbath, why are you saying it's so serious an issue?
Right here. And, it's not just being, we are not seeing this text here just for the sake of emphasis. The other more critical reason, the understanding that I have here, is the centrality of the Sabbath in the covenant. You need to remember, we have just said that we are seeing kind of like a mirror. Chapter 35 to 40 of Exodus is a mirror, is mirroring chapter 25 to 31 of Exodus. There's almost a repetition. The interesting thing, though, is that in chapter 25 to 31, that section, you start with you finish with the Sabbath. In 31, that is where you end with the Sabbath law. Yeah? But here now in this, Moses begins with the Sabbath law. The reason is because the Sabbath is very central to the covenant. In fact, in chapter 31, verse 16 and 17, the Bible says that therefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations as a perpetual covenant. It is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh day he rested and was refreshed. In other words, the sign of the covenant that God is making with his people is the Sabbath. So this is not some, somebody may read and you feel it is misplaced. No, it is not. If you're going to actualize the Sabbath, especially after showing your tendency to go into idol worship, then the sign between me and you that you're keeping the covenant, then you're not surprised now that the Sabbath begins there. So it opens the action part of the covenant, it being actualized, because it is the sign. It shall remain as a perpetual sign of the covenant before God. So yes, there is emphasis, but also it's very, very central. And so Moses begins with it. Okay. And also finally, I want to say that it doesn't matter what you're doing, even if it's about serving God. There are people who justify breaking the Sabbath in the name of they were serving God.
Exactly, and that's what I wanted to ask Pastor Kabira, because it seems so serious a matter, Pastor Kabira, that he says whoever does any work on it shall be put to death. Kindly help us understand, like, I'm not supposed to do anything according to God, and like nowadays, even ministers will, or even us in the media, will justify what we are doing on Sabbath and say, it's holy work, and that's why I had to do it. Otherwise, how would I have gotten the sermon?
Wow. People are afraid of literal death, and that's why we're counting it as a big thing. Even today, people, just by breaking the Sabbath, you're slowly dying, if you did not know. The constant theme in the Bible, apart from salvation, Jesus Christ is the Sabbath, which of course all of it is tied together anyway in the end. It's a constant theme that goes throughout all the way. Sabbath, it belongs to God. That's one. To understand why it means death. Sabbath belongs to God. It's a day that is holy. Any act that desecrated God, or the punishment was death. So literally, when you're breaking Sabbath, it's like getting into the most holy temple and desecrating it, the most holy place and desecrating it. Anytime you break the Sabbath, you do something wrong, you're doing something wrong that does not belong to you. Consider the death penalty here in Kenya. It's given to who? To those capital offenses like rape and robbery with violence. Why? Because you've gone to somebody else's space and destroyed somebody else's space. That is what it means. That is rape. That's why it cannot be condoned. That is why robbery with violence, you're going to somebody else's space and disturbing their space. Now, take that seriousness the government, the law has in Kenya, with the serious now with God. The Sabbath, absolutely, all of it belongs to God. It's not ours. So if you desecrate it, if you do something wrong on that particular Sabbath, it's like robbery with violence before God, because you are destroying his entire day. He's only given you the pleasure of being there, of being able to rest in the day God rested. But when you go there, instead of resting, I invite you over to my house, and instead of you enjoying the buffet meal I have given you, you decide to steal from me. You know what the government will do, obviously. Yes, it's still dead. So I let us not look at Sabbath like it's a random day. Look at it entirely as belonging to God, including the rest of the things God has given, including tithe, everything that belongs to God exclusively. The punishment is death. Why? Because you are literally stealing from God. He says, you're stealing from me. And of course, if the government, if the public today, in the world today, we punish such kind of crimes with death or life imprisonment, how much more then?
Well, and you know, in verse 3, same thing, the last part of verse 2 and 3, you shall kindle no fire throughout your dwellings on the Sabbath day. And I'm asking myself, of course, I'm not supposed to desecrate this Sabbath. There are things I'm not supposed to do. But again, during the time of Jesus Christ, when you get to the New Testament, there are things he did on the Sabbath, and then he qualifies them in Mark 2:28, saying from 28, that Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So I'm wondering, where is the line between the work? Because now when Christ comes, it's as if now I can do some work. But not all works can be done on the Sabbath, Pastor Nyagah.
Thank you. I will ask us to go to Isaiah 58.
Okay.
Just read a text there, and then I can explain a few things. Isaiah 58, we read verse 13.
If you turn away your foot from the Sabbath, from doing your pleasure on my holy day, and call the Sabbath a delight, the holy day of the Lord honorable, and shall honor him, not doing your own ways, nor finding your own pleasure, nor speaking your own words. 14, then you shall delight yourself in the Lord, and I'll cause you to ride on the high hills of the earth, and feed you with the heritage of Jacob your father. The mouth of the Lord has spoken.
I thought this verse would help us understand this issue of working and not working.
It does, it does.
The Bible does not say, or does not mean that you shall not do any work, in the sense of you sitting or sleeping. Actually, even sitting is doing work. Even sleeping is work. Even talking is work. So the Bible goes ahead to define what is it that God does not approve as part of work. And in this verse, it says, anything that is your own pleasure. Okay? That's the words that he uses. For doing your pleasure. Then he goes on to say, doing your own ways. You know, your own pleasure, your own ways. and then speaking your own words. Okay? Now this is very, very important. So that if what I'm doing is not for my own pleasure, it's for the pleasure of the Lord, because now the comparison here is between me and God. Because this is my day. I have given you 6 days to do your things. But I want you this particular day to do my things. So that all that I do on this particular day, I am doing it for the Lord. Okay? So it doesn't mean I won't do. But when I do it, it should not be my own pleasure, but it should be seeking for his own pleasure. And in Hebrew, there are 2 terms, 2 words that are used to bring out the issue of work. There's what we call avoda and melak. Now, avoda is a general name meaning work, like we are talking or we are working.
Any work.
But melak, when it's used in Hebrew, it has a meaning of work that gives gain. And where the Sabbath prohibition of working on Sabbath has been used, God uses melak in Hebrew.
Okay.
Meaning, I'm telling you, don't do things that you are out for gain on this particular day. But you see, when it comes out in English, the English
Work is work.
terms are not able to
Same term,
differentiate.
yeah.
But the Hebrew mind, when God says, thou shalt not work on this particular day, they understood. Because the term that has been used, the one that has been used, then explains to them what exactly God is meaning. So that now, when you come to verse number 3, where he says, do not rekindle the fire on this particular day, they understand why. Because I think in our generation today, it becomes very difficult for anyone to understand, can God be this petty on this issue of Sabbath? But if we appreciate what was happening in the Hebrews' time, they didn't have, these days, Pastor, you go, you press a button in your, kitchen and there is fire. Or you use a matchbox. But these days, you don't have to use a matchbox. Just turn a knob this way and you have fire. But those days, rekindling fire was a serious work. Was a serious work because they would use a stick and then there's another piece of wood and then they rub it until you sweat, man. And then fire comes out. It was a serious work for anyone to do. And so on Sabbath, that would take a lot of time, a lot of, it's really manually working. And because God had taught them earlier, you remember in chapter 16, that they would prepare. How he was seeing them collecting the manna in the wilderness. Then they would prepare food for Sabbath on Friday to avoid that tedious work. And so then it leaves you on a Sabbath day only to do that which serves the Lord. And that's where the New Testament, Jesus does not seem to negate the Old Testament command on the issue of Sabbath. You can work on Sabbath. Like he said, if a donkey has fallen in the pit, what do you do? Now, when you're not gaining in doing that, you're saving life. You're working for the Lord. If we are here worshiping on a Sabbath, and this house is on fire, we will not sit here and say we can't work on Sabbath.
Let's wait for tomorrow.
Or not even this house, within the neighborhood. We will all go and try to see what we can do because we are saving life. But not engaging on our own gain.
So the principle is Isaiah 58, 13, 14. That's not for your own pleasure, speaking your own words for personal gain. Melak, eh?
Yeah, melak.
Yeah, not melak, but
no.
the holy...
It's avoda, not melak.
You say the avoda is any kind of work.
We can do any kind of work. I can preach, we can sing. But I cannot go out for my own gain. Melak.
Okay, wow. Thank you. Now, okay, it's that serious. That's why we had to take the first segment just to understand verse 1 to verse 5. Now, when we come back, we continue with the offerings for the tabernacle, even as Moses instructed the children of Israel. Don't go away. We are coming back shortly. Hello and welcome back to the Bible Journey. Thank you very much for sticking with us here on this show. And of course, I have with me my dear pastors, Pastor Kabira Kabira, Pastor Dan Abuya, and Pastor Peter Nyagah. Welcome back, my guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Pastor Kabira, you mentioned something which seemed so important for the viewer when we were on break on verse 3.
Oh, sorry. Yes. I just wanted to say, God does not want us to get in trouble. Then He provides, the solutions to trouble. He prefers we avoid temptation. That is why Jesus was saying, the best way to pray is lead us not into temptation. Rather than, when we are in temptations now, Lord, what do we do?
All right.
The Lord would rather, and I believe that's the best principle for me, He would rather solve the issue before it happens. The whole issue of you shall kindle no fire means, because you basically light a fire to begin another process. So it is easier to cut off from the fire rather than, if there was no rule about you shall kindle no fire, there will probably be another one about do not put a pot, do not remove it. You do a pot, you need to wash it, you need to take it, you need to, so there'll be rule. This you shall not kindle fire. It is for our own good, so that it cuts off work from the source. It's like the law we were reading about. For example, you shall not eat a dead carcass. It may look like it's an ambiguous, who will do that? But as soon as you do that, then you subject yourself to another problem, and so many problems from there on. So God was very good for us, including what Pastor Nyagah has said. This would help cut a lot of work issues from the beginning.
Preempting.
Yes, it was, thank you. He's basically preempting the work that you might do. Well, it is even in a desert, yes, but the Lord was providing. You will even say it's cold, for example, and they will need a fire. It's already been explained. But as soon as you put fire, I have seen even from home, many of us will agree, as soon as you just get tempted to do one thing, you say, let me just brush this off. You brush this off, you see another thing, you see the seat is not in the place, and then it's now a whole chain of events to the end.
So lead us not into temptation. That's what you're saying in verse 3.
Yes.
Wow, okay.
But also, Ratemo, there's another verse which came to my mind, just helping our members to appreciate that actually God wants us to work on Sabbath, and working on Sabbath is not sin, but He prohibits, okay? As we had said earlier, based on Isaiah chapter 58, there is a New Testament text which is very, very important. I thought we need to bring out the book of Matthew chapter 12, verse 5.
Matthew
12 verse. And I think this issue of working has been there, on not working on Sabbath, and people take it out of proportion. And Jesus brought out this in chapter 12 of Matthew, in verse number 5, if you can read.
Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless?
Maybe a different version?
It's the same version, I believe all of us have.
NIV.
12
New
verse,
American Standard,
Yeah,
says,
right.
or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priest in the temple break the Sabbath and are innocent? How did the priest break the Sabbath? It was obvious to everyone. They were working on Sabbath. They were busy. Those sacrifices, the rituals they were doing, it was a lot of Sabbath. I'm a pastor. And Sabbath day is the day when I'm tired more than any other day. I go home to sleep, I'm exhausted.
Like it's your busiest day
Yes,
of the week?
but I'm innocent according to the scripture.
Yeah. Of course, if you don't do it, we won't worship.
Yeah.
How about if you say it has a gain, because you'll get paid?
No. Put
Yeah.
that aside. Put that
Pastors are
aside.
not paid.
I'm reading a text. Or have you not
Sure.
read the law that on the Sabbath, the priest in the temple, that's where we are as pastors, break the Sabbath and are innocent. Because they were facilitating worship. Let me ask you, Ratemo, do you think God rests on Sabbath? If God ceased working on Sabbath, what would happen?
They say so in
Do you think angels stop working on Sabbath?
No. We need protection. We
There's
need
a principle we're
guidance.
talking about here. There's a principle we're talking about here. So God forbid working on Sabbath on one principle. And He said it, I have given you 6 days to do all that you want to do for you.
All
And
that
says,
profit
this
you.
7th day is my day. Do it to glorify me. He did not say, do not do anything. He says, do not do anything for yourself. Do everything for myself.
That's
Wow.
right. Yeah.
Just,
Well,
I know it's we are too much on Sabbath,
yeah.
but I have to read just 2 verses
Okay.
because of what he said. In Luke 13, Jesus is giving a good example on how to use the Sabbath. There is a lady who was had a spirit of infirmity for 18 years. I don't know if you remember the story. And then Jesus says to the lady, you're loosed. But verse 14, chapter 13, verse 14 says, but the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, very angry, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, there are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore, come and be healed on them and not on the Sabbath day. His reasoning was exactly like everybody else. Then Jesus answered to him, you're quite a hypocrite. And then he gives the example of the ox we know falling in it. But he says, verse 16, that is why I wanted us to read. So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound. Think of it. You know, look at what Jesus says. For 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath. What better day to make somebody free from work, from the bondage of sin,
make them
than on the
rest
Sabbath.
from their suffering.
So yes, it is work, but it has got greater gain than allowing this woman just to be what? To remain in suffering just because what? You cannot work. Jesus was basically trying to say, life now is so important. You cannot be able to bring this out.
I would have asked why she couldn't have come on Friday, and you know, still
Why
because
she
she
came
has
on
been
Sabbath.
sick. She has been sick all these years.
Right.
I would have asked why, you know, it won't do harm, according to me, coming the next day and be healed, be loosed from the high
Ratemo.
infirmity.
Because you are
But
assuming people are in
Ratemo.
control. For 18 years, you think she
Ratemo.
did not have a Monday to Friday. For 18 years.
No, Ratemo is
Have
behaving like
somebody
he's never been sick. You know, when you're sick, you always think that you'll be fine the next minute.
Yeah.
Until, and at times, you know, it comes time you say, I have to go to hospital. And when that has come, you have to go to hospital. You cannot say, let me wait tomorrow. This is about health. This is about life.
But,
Yeah.
then
But the
also
whole
it
idea
brings
is-
the spirit
yes.
of Sabbath. The Sabbath spirit is one of recreation,
Yes.
one of restoration.
The whole point of
so
Sabbath is
at
that.
all times, I mean, especially on Sabbath, the Sabbath is meant to restore and refresh and rejuvenate us, so that we are ready and empowered for a new week.
Well,
yeah,
you know,
so
That's
you
what
know
Jesus
what-
said, what a
it's
better day than the Sabbath. Because
You
it
know,
exactly means that.
what I'm saying is, this kind of nullifies my thinking and my other fellow human being thinking that, you know, like, why not wait for tomorrow and do some things can wait. But Christ says straightly that she ought to have been loosed, and he says, what better day to
Yeah,
be
it's
loosed
Christ who
from
says,
her
what a better
infirmities
day
than the Sabbath, because it's actually
It
rest
means
from
that.
the
That
infirmities.
is the whole meaning of Sabbath.
So in summary, Ratemo, I know there are people out there who have taken the issue of Sabbath to the extreme. And there are others who have taken the issue of Sabbath so lightly with contempt. I think we need the Bible is bringing us into
The
you know,
context of the Sabbath, the real
appreciating the spirit behind the Sabbath.
The Sabbath.
Please don't deny your body food on Sabbath because you think
have to
eating
eat.
is
Or eat
working.
bad food.
We know there are people out there who don't
There are
eat on
people
Sabbath.
who want to fast all Sabbath.
Yeah. Or there are people out there who actually have said Sabbath was for Jews. It's not for us. So any extreme is sin before the Lord.
Well, let's end it there. Pastor, that was the first verse. What was the second verse as we now proceed to? You said you wanted to read 2 verses.
Oh, that was, I read the 2 of them in the same.
Oh,
that is in
okay. Thank you. Now, offerings for the tabernacle. Now, I just want you to appreciate what Moses is now saying to the people here, because he's from the mountain. Now he's telling them the conversation that he had with God on the mountain, Pastor Dan.
Right, yeah. And so he's talking that the resources which are needed. And so he calls upon the people to give a free will offering for the temple service. So
That is in verse 4 to 9.
verse 4 to 9, and he lists all the material that will be needed for the temple there. From the gold and, you know, the spices, as in everything that will be needed. It's a very short text. Surprisingly, it misses nothing out. That will be necessary for the building of the temple. Talk of acacia wood, talk of gold, talk of blue purple. Even the provisions for now the services, the temple services, they are all there, the oil and the incense and all that, yeah. Now, what I'd like to say is this. This is really the mind of God. Manifest in Moses. This is how God does things. He sits down and he calculates. Christ actually put it better in Luke chapter 14 when he says, which of you, which man when he wants to build a house, does not sit down first and count the cost, and make sure that the account is ready, everything is sorted, and then they start now. Lest they start and then they are not able to finish midway, and then men will laugh at him. So really, this is the principle here. Moses makes proper preparation, just like God does in the week of creation. Make sure everything is sorted out, all the resources needed, all the plan, and then now, before they embark on the work. So it was not a haphazard work. The tabernacle of the Lord, where he will come to dwell with his people, it had to be built. It wasn't just the end, it was also the means. How it was done was as important as seeing the tabernacle standing up in an orderly way.
And Pastor Nyagah, from verse 10 to 19, Moses now is about the articles of the tabernacle. And the first interesting thing that Moses does is to invite people, all people who are gifted artisans. Among you shall come and make all that the Lord has commanded. Then he goes ahead to, explain how the tabernacle shall be made. What did you say about the articles of the tabernacle?
And before he says something I feel moved important that I also must mention, though, is verse 5. It says, this command came from the Lord, but then it says, whoever is of a willing heart, let him bring it as an offering. So this is very important. You could just stand by the way, you could not be stoned to death that you didn't bring something. But you'd be, as we move along, you're going to see how people felt the privilege and the joy of giving to the Lord of a willing heart. Not of goals, not of being coerced and all that. That's an important principle whenever we, praise God through our offerings.
Wow, amen,
Right.
amen. Pastor Nyagah.
Yeah, I think there's not much you can talk about the articles because we really dwelt deeply.
Yeah, which chapter was that when you are looking at that? So that our viewers can refer to it on our YouTube channel. Is it chapter 26?
Chapter 25.
25, from 25, then 26.
Down to 30.
Yeah, so our viewer, you
right,
can refer, you can refer to those particular episodes.
Up to 31.
Chapter 26, 25, 26.
Actually, Tabernacle is chapter 26.
26 mostly.
Then the tent is chapter 26, verse 7 to 13. Its coverings is chapter 26, 14. Then there were the boards, chapter 26, 15 to 25. The bars of the sanctuary were then chapter 26, 26 to 29. There were pillars. We went through all these things. Talking about the tabernacle, the tent, the covering, the boards, the bars, the pillars, the sockets. All those things we discussed. So what's happening now here in this chapter? The only difference is that when we covered chapter 25, 26, 27, 28, we were dealing with God talking to Moses and telling him what he is going to tell the children of Israel. Now, in this chapter, we are dealing with Moses doing what God instructed him. Now, he is telling
the people.
And that's why the verse that Pastor Dan has read, verse number 5, he tells them now, this is what I've received from the Lord, but it is a free will. Both for the materials and for the services. You volunteer to come and serve. So now he is engaging them. And what I think I would appreciate is like actually Moses is recording, not recording, he is telling them exactly the way God had instructed him. And that's where we see duplication here. It's not just duplication. It is Moses who is very faithful to what God commanded him. And so he cannot add or subtract. He has to report exactly the way God had instructed him.
And Pastor Kabira, there is also the tabernacle offering being presented, and basically, of course, the same way. It's Moses now telling the people, because the first time we talked about it, it was God telling Moses. The people didn't hear. Now Moses has to tell the people, and is it still as exact as it was, even as you touch on that from verse 20, of course, to 29?
Before the offering, allow me to mention this.
Oh, okay.
A lot of the times, sometimes you've seen even on Facebook, somebody puts a blueprint of what the house was to be and then the final when it has. And you're like, hey, what happened there?
These houses we are buying on.
That is right, yeah. And there are all these changes, and you know the blueprint has not quite been followed. Somebody along the way decided that, okay, you know what, maybe this corner should, maybe the dimension should extend, and all that stuff like that. Maybe they ran out of funds, and so they have to do modification. So what we are seeing here is that there is nothing like that. So you don't bring...
blueprint remains.
The blueprint remains when it comes from God. No modification, because, I mean, you can't be wiser than God. And that is why even the offering, it had to be important, you know, given first, so that nobody's going to say along the way, okay, you know what, we are missing some gold.
Yeah, we
so
need
that
more.
side, God said, let us use gold. Seems like there's some extra silver here.
Yeah.
Right, yeah, so.
Okay, Pastor
Right.
Kabira.
I really want to appreciate chapter 25, 26, and 26.
Verse 25.
Well, no, I'm just saying,
okay, chapter.
Chapter. Let's just try and imagine what God has said. Everybody bring a free will offering. That is what he said in chapter 25, verse 2. And then from there, he proceeds to give specifics. You know, 5 curtains that will be this weight, this measure, you shall put this and that. And then when it's now time to ask, did Moses ask for, you know, like how we do sometimes in our camp meetings or when you're doing committee, we need 10 lorries and we need 5 lorries of sand and 10 lorries of stone and what? No. Moses basically said, he just did a sermon and said, good morning. You know, this is the first time everybody's gathered. Since the golden calf thing. This is the first time they have gathered. So they are gathered, and perhaps they are afraid of another more punishment. Then Moses says, no. Today it's not about punishment. It's not about anything. I just want to say something.
Right.
So we had a talk with God. He wants to do a tabernacle, and that is what now. We really need offerings for the tabernacle. We need articles of the tabernacle as follows. And then, so friends, I feel that we need to give to the Lord. How many together with me? You know, like every pastor says, without threatening, like others people say, you will die if you go without hearing this call, you know. He just does a very nice sermon. God wants us to give him an offering for the temple. Remember what they had said about the golden calf. They wanted a God they could see. True?
Yeah.
But now, Moses is telling them, I want us to give something. And that temple, that tabernacle, will be the presence of God. Actually, what you guys were thinking about the golden calf, let me tell you a better thing.
Yeah, it was a good thought, but
the real thought is now here.
Yeah,
whatever you had planned in your mind to have a physical God, I have a better idea, a tabernacle, that God told me. And so therefore, please give. The Bible gives a record of heartily. Then everyone came whose heart was tired. Every man was tired. Yani, you feel your heart, I have to do this thing. I messed up before, but if the Lord's presence will be with us every now and then. So from verse 21, verse 24, verse 22, verse 25, verse 28, and even verse 29 gives instances where everyone will be tired, whether it was the artisans, whether it was the women with gold and these other things, whether it was the gifted ones, whoever it was, they gave so much that we'll find later it was just too much. They didn't Moses didn't need to say, I need 10 meters of purple. They were just saying, I just want to give a random example, like look at verse 26. And all the women whose words stirred with wisdom, span yarn of goat's hair. They just feel like, I can do this thing with wisdom. Anaanza kushona. Then the verse 25 says, all the women who are gifted artisans span yarn with their hands and brought what they had of span of blue, purple, and scarlet and fine. Basically, it was a beehive of Israelites trying to do everything to have this presence of the Lord.
One thing I enjoy in this place also is, it's almost like some gender equality at the workplace.
Sure.
Women
are
do what you can do.
Gifted artisans. The women were there. They didn't just bring an offering, but actually they were very much involved. So, in our development committees,
if we involve women,
the sisters,
they have to be involved. And of course also, people give according to how they are able to give. Look at the rulers, for example, in 27. The rulers brought awning stones and the stones to be set in the ephod and in the breastplate, and the spices and the oil for the light, for the anointing oil and the sweet incense, you know. Like these are things that
What
maybe
the only ones
common
can
people,
afford.
yeah, the common people could not afford this, but the rulers have them, so they also give. So everybody has their space. It's a work that
Yes.
requires both
Everybody, input of
you know,
everybody.
we call these people Mama Mboga, and we have the president. So the president has his place, he
That's right.
has what he has to give, and that poor woman down there in the village has something to give.
That's right.
Maybe
Everybody has
final
something to give.
conclusion as we wind up.
Just to emphasize on the point that Pastor John, highlighted,
Mm.
very key. Observing on verse 21,
Mhm.
then everyone came whose heart was tired, and everyone whose spirit was willing. You go to verse number 22, then came both men and women as many as had a willing heart. Okay.
Mhm.
Then you go to verse number 26, and all the women whose hearts tired with wisdom span. Then we go to verse number 29. The children of Israel brought a free will offering to the Lord. All the men and women whose hearts were willing to bring materials. So the point here, which John was emphasizing, is willingness.
Yeah.
Moses did not coerce people
Yeah.
into giving. He did not play trickeries, that bring this, you plant a seed, all those kind of gimmicks that we see in churches
That
today.
you
The
pastors
return
mess
thing
around
of our brother.
Mm.
And also, if we appreciate verse number 20,
Mm.
even before we come to those other verses,
Mhm.
and all the congregation, all the children of Israel, departed from the presence of Moses. When Moses explained to them that God has invited them to come and build the sanctuary, and then he told them what God wants them to give and where to give it. Then he didn't force them that day to give. He let them to go home so that each person can go and search their heart. Now, there's a huge difference between verse number 20 and the rest of the verses, in my own opinion. And all the congregation of the children of Israel departed, meaning all the congregation listened. But when you come to verse 21, the Bible is specific. There were women who were coming. There were men who were coming. The Bible does not say all women came.
No.
All men came.
No.
It says women came. Then everyone came whose heart was willing, was tired. Not everyone among the children of Israel, but whose heart was tired. Meaning, as men and women of God, God makes an appeal to us that we may come and support his work, but does not force everyone. He does not anticipate everyone is going to come out. So even in our churches, people complain. We are the ones who are built of this church. We know so and so did not contribute anything. Don't complain.
Should have
If you
more
have
shares
come,
here.
if you have come, God wanted you to be part of the building.
Yeah.
And if brother X and sister Y has not come, don't complain. Because it is its willingness of the heart. And let's ministers and the leaders of the church don't force people. I've been to churches where leaders really take offense because some members are not participating in giving in church. That is not what we see Moses doing here. He tells people how to give and where to give, and then he also gives them time to go to search their heart.
The problem is when we give them the chance to come willingly and just leave it for them to do it, they don't do it until we have to say, okay, we have a goal. Now it's 3,000 each. And, for
God has not worked that
You're
way
not effective
anywhere.
preacher. You're not an effective
God has not worked that way anywhere in the scriptures. When you see you doing
not a
that,
good
you are failing as a
principle.
leader.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much, our dear viewer, for being with us on this study. It has been a nice one. And of course, we are still emphasizing verse 22, that it was from a willing heart. Like what I was just saying, some elders will feel like, okay, these people are not giving, we have to set goals, and let's not disturb them too much. If the Lord has said contribute, just contribute from a willing heart. Why on earth should somebody keep on insisting and forcing you to give money or to give these resources that are required not for building his house, but for building the Lord's sanctuary, or for the ministry to go forward? Let's do what the Lord requires us to do it. And after all, what we have, and us all, we belong to him. That is Psalms 24 verse 1. God bless you for being with us. See you next time.
Unalia nini sasa juu ya magumu ya kupatayo? Tumaini la ajabu, inua macho utazame juu. Wahangaikia nini? Neema yake Yesu inatosha. Inua macho utazame juu. Unalia nini sasa juu ya magumu ya kupatayo? Tumaini la ajabu, inua macho utazame juu. Wahangaikia nini? Neema yake Yesu inatosha. Inua macho utazame juu kwa Mungu. Neema yake Yesu ni ya bure, jibu kwa mambo yetu yote, suluhisho kwa shida zetu zote. Inua macho yako juu, umtazame Yesu. Neema yake Yesu ni ya bure, jibu kwa mambo yetu yote, suluhisho kwa shida zetu zote. Inua macho yako juu, umtazame Yesu. Heri sisi tulo hai, tuna afya, twamjua Mungu wetu. Je, wagonjwa na walolala mautini pasipo kumjua? Unafanya nini sasa kuwafikia wasiomjua? Kama si neema hatungekuwa hai hivi leo. Heri sisi tulo hai, tuna afya, twamjua Mungu wetu. Je, wagonjwa na walolala mautini pasipo kumjua? Unafanya nini sasa kuwafikia wasiomjua? Kama si neema hatungekuwa hai hivi leo. Neema yake Yesu ni ya bure, jibu kwa mambo yetu yote, suluhisho kwa shida zetu zote. Inua macho yako juu, umtazame Yesu. Neema yake Yesu ni ya bure, jibu kwa mambo yetu yote, suluhisho kwa shida zetu zote. Inua macho yako juu, umtazame Yesu. Neema yake Yesu ni ya bure, jibu kwa mambo yetu yote, suluhisho kwa shida zetu zote. Inua macho yako juu, umtazame Yesu.